Today, we are diving into one of the biggest questions we all have. We're not just going to talk about theories, though. We're looking at real, personal encounters that are pretty hard to ignore.
I mean, really think about that for a second. It's a question that everyone, everywhere has asked at some point. Is that final moment truly final? Or is it possible there's something else? In this explainer, we're going to explore some absolutely incredible stories. These come from everyday people, from nurses, even from doctors, and they all point to the idea that our bonds, the connections we have with the people we love, they just might last long after we say goodbye.
So let's start with those really personal moments, the small, sometimes startling signs that people get, which feel like they came directly from a loved one who's passed on. Okay, so picture this. There's a guy in a bookstore, and he's thinking about his mom who had recently passed. He's feeling a bit down, and he's just wondering, why haven't I gotten a sign? Just something to know she's okay. And right then, in that exact moment he's having that thought, something totally wild happens. A book doesn't just fall off a shelf. No, it shoots out, like 3 feet out, and lands right there at his feet. Just bam. And you can probably guess what's coming. He bends down, picks it up, and the title? It's literally Hello from Heaven. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. That's not a coincidence, that's a message, loud and clear. This next story just shows how incredibly specific these signs can get. A family is gathered after a funeral, and suddenly, weird things start happening. The fridge just stops working, but nothing else does. Then, a light bulb in a bedroom, a room with no electricity, mind you, starts glowing bright blue. It pulses 3 times, right in front of everybody. And that's when the son says, "I just asked my grandma for a sign." And as soon as his dad says, if anyone could find a way, Mama could, the light goes out. The timing is just perfect.
So these personal moments are one thing. They're incredibly powerful. But the whole story gets even more compelling when it's not just one person, but multiple people, all witnessing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Take this case. In a hospital ER. For years, different nurses reported seeing the same figure, a tall man in a hat, kind of translucent, in one specific hallway. But here's the kicker. A brand new nurse who knew nothing about these stories comes running to her coworkers, absolutely terrified. And her description of what she saw, it matched the other accounts, detail for detail. That's not just a story anymore. That's corroboration. And sometimes, our own technology gets in on the act. The day after his father-in-law, Frank, passed away, a man named Ricardo gets a call. He looks at the caller ID, and it's Frank's name and number. Now, you might think, okay, a glitch, maybe. But here's the thing. 2 of his coworkers were standing right there with him. They saw the phone ring. They saw Frank's name on the screen. Twice. Now that is hard to explain away. All right, so now let's pivot. We've heard personal stories, we've heard group stories. Now let's bring in a different perspective. A man of science. We're talking about Dr. John Larma, a hospice doctor who, believe me, started out as a total skeptic. Over 15 years of work, Dr. Larma started to see a pattern he just couldn't ignore. Almost like clockwork, about 3 to 4 weeks before passing, his patients would start telling him the same thing. They were seeing spirits, often loved ones, at their doorway. And this happened consistently across every culture, every religion. Now, of course, his first thought was hallucinations. Makes sense, right? But he quickly realized these were different. His patients weren't confused or running a fever. They were totally lucid, having coherent conversations, and afterwards they remembered everything. But the biggest difference? They all described the experience not as scary, but as bringing this incredible, profound sense of peace. That's when he knew he was seeing something else. And it's not just behavior. Other research compiled by Dr. John Alexander points to something physical. In carefully controlled experiments, dying patients were placed on hypersensitive scales. And what they found was that at the precise moment of death, the body registered a sudden, tiny loss of weight, about ½ an ounce to an ounce, a change that, so far, science has no explanation for. So, where does that leave us? When you start to piece all of this together, the personal signs, the events with multiple witnesses, the clinical observations from doctors, a whole new picture of life and death starts to take shape. And that's exactly the conclusion Dr. John Alexander came to. He put it perfectly. He said that any one story, you can try to dismiss it, but when you look at the totality of the evidence, all of it fitting together, it becomes obvious. Consciousness doesn't just end when the body does. It continues. Okay, but let's be real. If this communication is possible, it sounds like it could be a little overwhelming, right? Well, one medium named Marisa Ryan felt exactly that way, until she got some simple advice. You're in charge. You can set boundaries. The big insight for her was realizing she could just calmly state when she was available to connect. This is huge. It suggests that this connection for any of us doesn't have to be a one-way street. We can actually manage it ourselves. And that really brings us to the heart of it all. If you look at these stories, death stops looking like a brick wall that separates us from our loved ones forever. It's more like a doorway. The connection, the love, it isn't broken. It just transforms. It shifts from being physical to being spiritual. So that's the final question, really. If we start to see death not as an ending, but as a transition, what does that do to how we live our lives right now? How does that change our relationships, our fears, our day-to-day choices? That's a powerful idea to sit with. Thanks for joining us.